The house on the hill was in a tizzy. Workmen's trucks streamed up the long gravel driveway. 2 sets of plumbers from both sides of the river had been summoned to de-winterize the 5 bungalows behind the main house, and they did not care for one another. A broken set of windows in one bungalow had to be replaced post-haste, and a family of field mice had chewed through the electrical cable powering another. The handyman, who did not live on the property, was so overwhelmed by the state of affairs, he retreated to the extensive covered porch to eat a cheese sandwich in long, deliberative bites. The mistress of the house, Masha, had lowered the shades in her first-floor office to escape the cacophony of modern tools and loud country cursing. At times she would peek out to note the surfaces that would have to be wiped down after the workmen left. Natasha, who liked to go by Nat, her 8-year-old daughter, was upstairs, illuminated by a screen in the darkness of her room, in a lonely public world of her own. The only happy member of the household was Alexander Borisovich Senderovsky, known as Sasha to his friends. Happy, we should say, with an asterisk. He was agitated as well as excited. A windstorm had brought down the heavy branches of 2 dead trees flanking the driveway, scattering the vast front lawn with their dead white rot. Senderovsky liked to expound at length upon the entropic nature of his estate, the way all manner of growth was allowed to go its own way, sumacs elbowing out more well-heeled plants, ivy poisoning the perimeter, groundhogs bringing destruction upon the gardens. But the scattering of dead tree limbs made the house on the hill look apocalyptic, the very thing Senderovsky's guests were coming up to escape. The handyman claimed a bad back and was not handy enough to remove all the tree limbs on his own, and the so-called tree guy had gone missing. Senderovsky, in his athletic pants and wildly colored dressing gown, had tried to move one of these prehistoric-looking branches himself, but the very first heave made him fear a hernia. "Ah, the hell with it," he said, and got into his car. A word about the car. Well, not so much about the car as the way in which it was driven. Senderovsky had only learned to drive 3 years ago, at the milestone age of 45, and only within the limits of a country setting. The highway on the other side of the river unsettled him. He was a fiercely awful driver. The half-empty local roads inspired him to gun the engine of his sturdy but inflexible Swedish automobile. And he saw the yellow stripes bisecting the roads as suggestions, meant for less experienced drivers, whoever that might be. Because he did not believe in road marks or certain aspects of relativity, the concept of a blind curve continued to elude him. His wife no longer allowed him to drive with their child on board. What was worse, he had somewhere picked up the phrase, tooling around. And now Senderovsky raced to his errands, mindful only of the speed traps, set with boring predictability on the frayed edges of towns or the school zones, where the fines could be doubled. First, he visited his butchers, 2 former catalog models from the city, now a husband and wife, who plied their trade out of a barn so red it verged on the patriotic. The 2 magnificent 25-year-olds, all teeth and coveralls, presented him with a wrapped parcel of sweet and Italian sausages, glistening hamburger patties, and his secret weapon. Lamb steaks that clung to the bone, so fresh they could only have been rivaled by a restaurant Senderovsky admired in Rome's abattoir district. The very sight of meat for tomorrow's cookout inspired in him a joy that, in a younger man, could be called love. Not because of the meat itself, but because of the conversations that would flow around it as it was marinated, grilled, and served, despite the growing restrictions on such closeness. By noon tomorrow, his best friends, the ones who had been so hard to bring together during previous summers, would finally unite, brought together by the kernels of a growing tragedy, to be sure, but brought together nonetheless, in his favorite place on earth, the house on the hill.